Some chronicles, written in the awestruck aftermath, speak of impossible numbers. One from the city of Lübeck claims nearly 6 million men gathered on a single field in the summer of 1410. The numbers are legend, of course. Modern historians place the true figure closer to 60,000 souls, still one of the largest armies medieval Europe had ever seen. But the legend tells a deeper truth. This was not merely a clash of armies, it was a collision of worlds. For 200 years, the Teutonic Order had been more than an army. They were an idea, a divine mandate written in steel and stone. They were God's warriors, and their stark black cross on a field of white was the symbol of an inevitable, holy conquest. On July 15, 1410, on a field in Prussia known as Grunwald, that idea was about to die. And the question that hangs over the blood-soaked earth is not just how an army was defeated, but how an idea is killed. To understand the shockwave that followed, you must first understand the Order. They were a military monastic state, born in the Crusades of the Holy Land, but perfected on the cold shores of the Baltic. They had carved a nation out of the northern wilderness, a fortress state built for perpetual war. Their economy was war, their politics was war, their faith was war. A network of imposing red brick castles stood guard over a lucrative monopoly on the region's grain and amber trade, funding an army that was the pinnacle of medieval military technology. A Teutonic Knight was a walking fortress of polished plate armor, a master of the heavy cavalry charge, an armored fist that had shattered every army sent against it for generations. Their reputation drew warriors from across Christendom. French, English, and German nobles, the so-called guest crusaders, flocked to Prussia to fight alongside the Order, seeking glory and salvation in the Northern Crusades. They were disciplined, pious, and utterly convinced of their own divine purpose. They saw themselves as the judges of faith and the rightful masters of Eastern Europe. This unshakable belief in their own superiority, nurtured over 2 centuries of victory, would prove to be their most fatal weakness. Standing against this iron monolith was an alliance of necessity, led by 2 cousins whose lives were a tapestry of rivalry and respect. The first was Władysław II Jagiełło, King of Poland. He was a man who understood that the most decisive battles are often won without drawing a sword. Born a pagan Grand Duke of Lithuania, he had executed a brilliant political masterstroke. By converting to Catholicism and marrying the young Queen of Poland, he united their 2 realms and, in a single act, erased the Teutonic Order's very reason for being. Their holy war to convert pagan Lithuania was now a transparent land grab against a Christian king. The knights cried foul, questioning his faith all the way to the Pope, but the moral justification for their crusade had vanished. The second was his cousin, Vytautas the Great, Grand Duke of Lithuania. Where Jagiełło was patient and strategic, Vytautas was a whirlwind of ambition and a military genius. Their past was a bitter feud of betrayals, prison escapes, and even temporary alliances with the Teutonic Knights themselves. But now, facing a common existential threat, they had forged a fragile peace. Vytautas, the peerless field commander, would lead the armies, but under the ultimate authority of Jagiełło, the supreme strategist. It was a partnership that perfectly balanced fire with foresight. Together, they summoned an army that reflected the vibrant, chaotic diversity of their united lands. At its heart were the flower of Polish knighthood in their heavy armor and the swift, deadly light cavalry of Lithuania. But with them rode Ruthenian banners from the lands of modern-day Belarus and Ukraine. There were Bohemian mercenaries, including a young Jan Žižka, the future Hussite legend. And most alien to the Teutonic Knights, a contingent of Tatar horsemen from the Golden Horde, masters of the bow and the lightning-fast tactics of the steppe. It was a multi-ethnic, multilingual coalition united by a single purpose: to break the Black Cross for good. Their campaign began not with a charge, but with an act of breathtaking ingenuity. The Teutonic commanders, expecting the Allied army to cross the Vistula River at a predictable point, had positioned their forces to wait. They waited in vain. Far upriver, Near a royal forest at Kozienice, Polish master carpenter Władysław had spent the winter and spring overseeing a secret project of massive scale. Under a cloak of secrecy, his men had prefabricated the components of a massive floating bridge, hundreds of boats, thousands of beams and planks, and miles of rope. In late June, this entire structure was floated silently down the Vistula. As Teutonic scouts watched the wrong fords, the Allied army arrived at the village of Czerwinsk. In less than a day, the bridge was assembled across the wide river, a wooden road appearing as if by magic. For 3 days, the entire Allied host, tens of thousands of men, their horses, their wagons, their artillery, poured across the river, a feat of logistics that was unheard of in medieval warfare. The move completely blindsided the Teutonic leadership. They had been outmaneuvered before the first sword was even drawn. Realizing he had been deceived, the Order's Grand Master, the proud and aggressive Ulrich von Jungingen, scrambled to gather his own army and marched to intercept the invaders as they drove for his capital, the great fortress of Marienburg. On the morning of July 15, 1410, the sun rose on a spectacular and terrifying scene. The Teutonic Knights had arrived first, their disciplined lines a sea of white cloaks and gleaming steel, drawn up between the villages of Grunwald and Tannenberg. Across the field, the Polish-Lithuanian host emerged from the woods, a dizzying forest of banners from dozens of different lands, a riot of color and noise against the Order's stark uniformity. And then, nothing. For hours, the two armies faced each other in a tense, silent standoff. The sun climbed higher, beating down on the Teutonic Knights. Encased in their steel armor, they began to bake, their legendary discipline fraying with every passing minute. King Jagiełło, the overall commander, was content to wait. He was a deeply pious man, and he spent the morning in prayer, letting the heat and the enemy's own arrogance do part of his work for him. Finally, Grand Master von Jungingen's patience snapped. In a gesture of supreme arrogance, he sent 2 heralds across the no-man's land. They carried 2 unsheathed swords, a gift for the Allied commanders. The message was a deliberate, calculated insult. If you're too cowardly to begin this fight, perhaps these will give you the courage you need. It was a piece of psychological warfare, but it would backfire spectacularly. King Jagiełło accepted the blades not as an insult, but as a prophecy. He saw them as a divine omen that the enemy's swords would fall into his hands this day. The moment was electric. The waiting was over. That arrogant gift, the Grunwald swords, would become one of Poland's most powerful national symbols, a testament to a victory born from an enemy's pride. The battle exploded with a thunderous roar as Vytautas led his Lithuanian and Tatar light cavalry in a furious charge against the Teutonic left flank. For more than an hour, a brutal, swirling melee raged. The air filled with the screams of men and horses, the crash of steel on steel, the thud of arrows finding their mark. It was a chaotic, desperate struggle under the blazing sun. Then, it looked like disaster. The Lithuanian line wavered, buckled, and then broke, fleeing the field in what appeared to be a complete rout. To the Teutonic Knights, this was the moment they had been waiting for. This was the familiar pattern of victory. But it was a lie. This was not a rout. It was a trap. Vytautas was employing a feigned retreat, a deadly tactic learned from the Mongol invasions, designed to lure an overconfident enemy out of formation. And the knights, their discipline eroded by the long wait and their own hubris, fell for it completely. With triumphant roars, they broke their perfect lines and galloped in a disorganized pursuit, hungry for the kill. They were stretching their army thin, exposing their flanks and creating the very chaos the Allies had planned for. The trap was being set. With the Teutonic left flank drawn away, the true battle began. The Polish heavy knights slammed into the main Teutonic line, and the fight became a horrifying, grinding slugfest. For hours, the two sides hacked at each other in a colossal scrum of armored men. At a critical moment, The great royal banner of Krakow, the symbol of the entire kingdom, fell to the ground. A cry of despair rose from the Poles. The king himself was nearly killed, saved only by the desperate intervention of his royal secretary. The battle hung on a knife's edge. Sensing victory, Grandmaster Ulrich von Jungingen made his final, fatal decision. Gathering his last 16 banners of elite reserve knights, he decided to deliver the killing blow himself. He personally led a charge straight at the wavering Polish center, aiming directly for King Jagiełło. It was the decisive moment of the battle. He had committed everything. There was nothing left to save him. And then the hammer fell. Just as von Jungingen's charge hit the Polish line, Vytautas's Lithuanians reappeared. They had rallied in the cover of the woods and now wheeled around, smashing into the completely exposed rear and flank of the Teutonic army. The pursuers were now the pursued. The trap was sprung. Surrounded and attacked from three sides, the once unbreakable Teutonic formation dissolved into chaos. Ulrich von Jungingen, realizing his mistake too late, was swarmed by Polish and Lithuanian warriors. He died in the swirling melee, reportedly from a spear thrust to the neck. The Grand Master was dead, and with him, all hope was lost. The death of the Grand Master turned a battle into a massacre. The Teutonic army disintegrated. Some knights made a last stand in a defensive wagon fort, but they were quickly overrun and slaughtered. The nearby marshes became killing grounds. Of the roughly 27,000 men the order fielded, it is believed some 8,000 were killed and another 14,000 captured. Almost the entire senior command, the Grand Marshal, the Grand Comtour, hundreds of brother knights, lay dead on the field. The military heart of the Teutonic Order had been ripped out in a single afternoon. In the weeks that followed, the Allies besieged the capital of Marienburg, but the fortress held out. Yet the Order was mortally wounded. The peace treaty that followed forced them to pay a crippling war indemnity, a sum so vast it bankrupted their state and turned their own subjects against them. Their military prestige was shattered forever. The myth of their invincibility was dead. The battle marked the end of 2 centuries of Teutonic expansion and the beginning of the rise of the Polish-Lithuanian Union, which would grow into one of Europe's largest and most powerful states. Today, the legacy of Grunwald lives on. It is a foundational story of national pride in Poland and Lithuania. The 2 swords are a revered national treasure. And every July, thousands of reenactors from around the world gather on that same field to recreate the clash, their cheers and the crash of steel echoing the events of that fateful day, a living monument to a battle that, in just a few hours, brought a holy empire to its knees and redrew the map of Europe. We spent hundreds of hours researching these pivotal moments to bring you stories that are not just entertaining, but historically sound. If you appreciate that effort and want to see more epic history brought to life, please consider subscribing and hitting the bell icon. It's the best way to support the channel and ensure you don't miss our next journey into the past.